February 11 commemorates the International Day for Women and Girls in Science, the day declared by the United Nations General Assembly in 2015. The day promotes the need to achieve gender equality and empowerment of women and girls in the field of science and address how gender diversity in the field will have benefits for all. The UN noted that gender equality in science is vital for the achievement of international development goals. Ari Katz from Boston Online Home Education joins us for insights. Ari, good morning. Good to speak to you on this day. Now, talk to us about, I suppose, basically STEM subjects is what we are discussing and how the child or young girls have been involved in science, technology and that sort of field. What is the involvement? What is the participation? What are those numbers looking like?
Okay, so good morning and thanks for having me on your show. I think first of all, let's just understand why it's so important that we address this today. So first up is that we need to heighten the awareness of the fact that women are so underrepresented in the fields of STEM. And just as an example of that, if one looks at the Engineering Council of South Africa, only 6% of professional engineers are actually women that are registered there. And in fact, women only account for 28% of engineering graduates at university. So it's really important that we look at this, and in particular the fact that STEM subjects will become the cornerstone of the digital economy. And in the future, the digital economy will really represent, they talk about 80% of the economy. So if women are being systematically excluded from that, either because they're not provided the opportunities at school or in the workplace or at university, then indirectly we are going to be excluding them from the workplace of the future and the inability to earn a living.
Ari,
so that's why it's so important to be addressing this today.
Ari, you've said if women are systematically excluded, suggesting that they may not be excluded. Talk to us about those processes.
On the contrary.
Okay, well, talk to us about
on the contrary.
Okay, talk to us about the processes in the schools or in the institutions where young girls are exposed to STEM. Is there an equitable exposure, if you will, for boys as there is for girls, or is that the point where the problem starts?
Exactly. So there's a UNESCO survey that shows that in fact young girls are discouraged from studying subjects like maths, physics, chemistry, etc. And it's not only by society at large, but it actually starts at the home, in home, and even at schools. That schools are encouraging young girls not to take subjects like maths, science, etc. And so certainly that's a perception that we need to change. And it almost has a snowball effect, because if we carry on with that, then we also don't have role models by which they can actually, whom they can emulate down the track. So it's really critical that we look at practical ways, and that's really the key, I think, to find practical ways in which we can encourage young girls to actually take up subjects like maths, science, etc. But in reality, in South Africa, it's even a bigger problem, because it's not only young girls. I mean, there's a study that shows that less than 40% of learners at a grade 5 level are competent in mathematics. So if you take that and you add on top of that the fact that girls are discouraged from taking subjects like mathematics, then we have a disaster on our hands.
You know, one of the things I raised in a previous interview is about the ability or capacity of educators to succinctly teach maths and teach STEM subjects. Now, if science STEM subjects are ordinarily a little bit more difficult than the arts, and you have an educator who's not sufficiently proficient in teaching those subjects, does that not contribute to the small numbers that we're seeing?
Absolutely. So what's interesting is that there was last week only a report that 54% of teachers, and this is unbelievable, that 54% of teachers who are going to be teaching primary school are not competent in mathematics.
Wow.
Now that's astounding, because if you think about that, the teachers are not competent, all the more so the learners are not going to be. But I also think that there's a silver lining, and the silver lining lies in the fact that we live in the digital age, and we have the opportunity to harness technology to actually address many of those gaps. So for example, one of the things that we can do today, which you couldn't do in the past, was we can do a diagnostic, a digital diagnostic, and we can identify exactly what a learner knows and what a learner doesn't know. So one of the diagnostics that we use, for example, you can identify that a learner can add and subtract fractions, but in fact, they can't divide fractions. Now, once you can use the technology to identify exactly what they know and what they don't know, you can also use the technology to actually remedy that. And the beauty of that is you can do that in a non-intimidating environment. So a learner online can go online and review a lesson as many times as he or she wants, and they can test themselves. They can progress at their own time, own pace, without that fear of embarrassment in a classroom situation. So whilst there are, we are faced with a number of problems, there are solutions. The challenge is really going to be to harness those solutions and to actually implement them in the digital age.
Well, walk us through some of those solutions, Ari.
Okay, so as I said before, I think if we look at technology, we would start off by doing a diagnostic to actually understand what learners know and what they don't know. From there, one can pinpoint the areas that need remediation, and one can teach directly to those areas, and then one can test it again. And if the learner still has problems, then one can use a teacher to actually intervene. In addition to that, there are a number of other technologies, such as adaptive learning, where you start at a lower level, and as you get more proficient, you move to a higher level. The system automatically moves you up the food chain, so to speak, and moves you down. And in that way, you build, number one, confidence, and number two, you build proficiency. So you can use adaptive learning. Then we have AI technology, where we're able to do predictions, and we're able to predict that a learner is struggling or is not going to make it for a whole bunch of factors, and we can identify what those factors are, and we can intervene. So the trick is really going to be to harness the technology, to encourage it and embrace it, instead of this aversion to utilizing technology. Now, I'm not suggesting that we use technology to replace teachers, not at all. What I'm suggesting is that we use a technology together with the teaching and learning, or to enhance the teaching and learning process, both in terms of identifying deficiencies and in terms of remediating those proficiencies. And so I think those are some of the technologies that can be used, and we should harness those resources.
Now, final question or thoughts are around what we can do as parents, because typically the little boy is given a toy car to play with, and possibly something that will lead to engineering, and typically the little girl is given a little doll or that sort of area. So what can parents do to contribute to a change in that landscape?
So I think the only way we're going to change it is, number one, it has to start at home. Parents have to encourage young girls to embrace STEM subjects, and we have to dispel this perception that STEM is not for young girls. Number one, it has to start at home, but it also has to be supported in the schools by teachers. And the teachers also need to encourage young girls, and both of those come together when one can pinpoint relatable role models for these young girls. So there are many, many women who have achieved extraordinarily in the fields of STEM. And I think it's really important that we bring that into the classroom and we bring that into the home to show young girls that they should actually be part of this solution, and that they can be part of the solution. And this is not the domain of young boys and men.